In the year 1900, a group of sponge divers set sail from the island of Symi, heading toward the coast of North Africa. A storm forced them to take shelter near a small, rocky island called Antikythera. While waiting out the weather, they decided to dive for sponges nearby. What they found instead would rewrite the history of ancient technology. At a depth of over 45 meters, in the dangerous strait between Antikythera and Crete, a diver named Elias Stadiatos noticed something strange in the sand, a bronze arm reaching up from the wreckage. He surfaced and told his captain. What they'd stumbled onto was a Roman-era cargo ship, one that had sunk somewhere between 70 and 60 BCE. The ship had likely set sail from the eastern Aegean, possibly the island of Rhodes or a port in Asia Minor, loaded with treasures bound for Rome. Its cargo told the story of its journey: wine jars from Rhodes and Kos, glassware from Egypt and the Syrian coast, marble statues carved in the Aegean, even coins from half a dozen different cities. Some of it was likely Greek art, swept up during Rome's conquest of the Hellenistic world and shipped home as spoils. This was an extremely dangerous stretch of water, a narrow channel that ships had to pass through for centuries, and one that had clearly claimed this vessel. The recovery effort itself was perilous. Divers worked at depths that were hazardous even decades later, and at least one lost his life in the process. Archaeologists were thrilled by the artistic finds, but one object at first seemed unremarkable: a corroded, unimpressive lump of bronze. It was set aside, catalogued, and largely forgotten. Then, in May of 1902, an archaeologist examining the recovered debris noticed something strange. Embedded in one of the encrusted lumps of rock was a gear wheel. That single detail changed everything. Closer examination revealed the rock wasn't a rock at all. It was a heavily corroded mechanical device, broken into 3 major fragments and dozens of smaller pieces. Whatever it was, it had gears. And nothing that ancient was supposed to have gears like this, roughly the size of a shoebox, about 33 centimeters tall, made of bronze and likely once housed in a wooden frame. To modern eyes, it resembled a strange ancient clock, dozens of interlocking gears, dials and inscriptions covering its surface, but clocks, as far as anyone knew, didn't exist yet, not for another 1400 years. For most of the 20th century, the device sat in a museum, its gears frozen, its purpose a mystery. Then, in 1958, a British-born physicist and historian named Derek de Sola Price received a small research grant, just enough to fund a flight to Athens and a week and a half studying the fragments in person. It was the beginning of an obsession that would last the rest of his life. Price spent decades chasing the mechanism's secrets, using gamma-ray photography to try to peer through a solid corrosion into the gears below. He published his first major findings in 1959, arguing the device was some kind of ancient astronomical calculator. 15 years later, in 1974, he published a far more detailed account, concluding it dated to around 80 BCE and functioned as a calendar computer, tracking the sky with an accuracy nobody thought the ancient world was capable of. But even Price's own X-ray images were often too blurred and overlapping to fully interpret. He died in 1983, having spent over 2 decades on this single object without ever seeing the complete picture. For years, most historians simply looked away from it. It was too strange, too advanced. It didn't fit the timeline they believed in. It wasn't until the late 1990s and early 2000s, when new imaging technology emerged, that researchers finally began to see inside the device clearly enough to understand it. And what they found was staggering. The Antikythera mechanism wasn't a clock for telling hours and minutes. It was something far more ambitious, a machine built to track the sky itself. Inside, researchers found at least 30 gears, and evidence the original device may have held as many as 72. Each one was hand-cut, with anywhere from 15 to over 200 tiny, triangular teeth. The number of teeth on each gear wasn't random, it was mathematics, frozen in bronze. Here's the idea in simple terms. The moon doesn't move across the sky at a perfectly even pace. It speeds up and slows down slightly during its orbit. To model that, the mechanism's makers used a technique called a pin and slot gear. One gear riding slightly off-center from another, so that as they turned together, the output speed would subtly rise and fall, mimicking the moon's real motion. It's a solution modern engineers wouldn't be surprised to find in an 18th century clock. Finding it in a device built more than 1,000 years earlier stunned everyone who studied it. By carefully combining gears of different sizes, the builders could model the sun, the moon, and all 5 visible planets, each moving at its own correct cycle. A rotating ball displayed the moon's actual phase. Dials on the back worked as a calendar and could predict eclipses years in advance, using an eclipse cycle that originally came from Babylonian astronomy. It even tracked the 4-year cycle of the ancient Olympic Games. Researcher Tony Freeth, who has studied the mechanism for over 2 decades, described it as almost unbelievable in its brilliance, noting that it captured nearly everything the ancient Greeks understood about astronomy. So, who could have built it? No signature survives, but researchers have their suspects. One leading theory points to Hipparchus of Rhodes, often called the father of trigonometry, and one of the first thinkers in history to seriously study the irregular motion of the moon. The mechanism's lunar mechanism relies on exactly the kind of math Hipparchus was known for. Some researchers even calculated that the eclipse predictions built into the device only line up correctly for a location at the latitude of Rhodes, Hipparchus's home. Others point instead to the school of Archimedes or to Posidonios, a philosopher known to have built a similar device generations later, according to the Roman writer Cicero, who saw it himself. Whoever built it, the achievement was staggering. Before this device was understood, historians believed nothing this mechanically complex existed until the rise of European clockwork in the 14th century. The Antikythera mechanism pushed that timeline back well over 1,000 years. For decades, the mechanism remained a theoretical puzzle, until people decided to actually build it. Since 2008, multiple research teams and independent engineers have constructed working replicas, some in bronze, some digital, some using modern 3D printing. Each one confirmed the same thing. Turn the crank, and the gears really do track the sun, moon, and planets, just as the fragments suggested. One of the most detailed physical reconstructions was completed using scans and mathematical modeling built up over years of study, finally letting researchers hold a working version of a machine that had sat broken at the bottom of the sea for 2,000 years. It was never a myth. It was real. And it worked. To this day, more than half of the mechanism is still missing. It's likely still resting on the seafloor near Antikythera, mixed among fragments no one has recovered. We don't know exactly who built it. We don't know exactly where. The evidence points toward Rhodes and toward Hipparchus, but no one can say for certain. We found one machine like this by accident in the wreckage of a ship that sank 2,000 years ago. What else is still down there?